Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis, LA and dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello, Paul.
Hello, Darren. Darren Walker, what a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for taking this call.
It's my honor and pleasure, Paul.
It is so good to speak with you, Darren. Where do I find you at the present moment?
You find me in Manhattan, the only place I am prepared to be. It will take more than a pandemic to get me to leave this city.
And do I find you at the Ford Foundation, or are you...
No, the Ford Foundation is closed, and we were the first foundation to close on March the 8th. And I am so busy here, and I'm, working nonstop. What about you?
My life has become, I love the fact that I'm to ask you questions and you ask me questions. It's an old technique that I know very well. My life has become so regimented. These quarantine tapes started exactly around that time. And for the last 6 weeks, every day we air. Every day I prepare for 2 quarantine tapes. It's been extraordinary. Wow. It's been extraordinary. It's really a chronicle of our time now. And it's been extraordinary to speak to, people from all walks of life, from Kianga Yamata-Taylor to Edwidge Danticat, to Werner Herzog, to Henry Rollins, to Bill McKibben. So many different people, doctors and homeless people. I mean, it's been amazing, and it's troubling, it's dire, it's dark, but it might also be an opportunity. And I want to talk to you about all of that, and begin by saying to you, as the president of the Ford Foundation, you have many, many different responsibilities. And in reading something you said in December of last year, unknowing, of course, of what was about to hit us, you said, I feel on some occasions as though we privileged people are eating lobster on the Titanic.
Yes, and I still feel that way because we privileged people only recently have we come to understand the idea of the essential worker, which to my mind is appalling that we did not fully understand who's really essential to our economy and how underappreciated and underpaid they are.
Yeah.
And this idea that I find myself thinking about often, eating lobster on the Titanic, is I challenge my thinking because the Titanic was inexorably doomed. There was nothing they could have done because it was the arrogance of the shipmaker and the captain. We are not doomed as a people, a humanity. We can change the trajectory of our society by making decisions that prioritize questions of equality and justice and fairness. And when we do, we won't be on the Titanic any longer. We'll actually be on a ship that can sail around the world. And it doesn't mean that there won't be choppy waters, but it does mean that everyone on the ship will share in the bounty and that there will be a sense of collective interdependence that unfortunately, certainly in the culture in the U.S., we've not shared in recent years.
You know, speaking to you now and hearing your response to my first question brings me back, as indeed I'd like you to bring me back to your earlier years, which have informed the way you answer such a question, and even the quirky funniness of Lobster on the Titanic, which is both funny and not funny at all. And I'm thinking now about all the invisible workers who have become essential, and your early days as a busboy, and what that might have informed for you in terms of lived experience.
Well, I certainly believe that my journey in this country could only have happened in this country. And it's one of the reasons I am so proud to have lived in a country that believed in me and invested in me, and to always, in spite of the difficulties I faced in life, to feel that my country was cheering me on. Whether it was coming out of rural Louisiana and having the opportunity to move to Texas and enroll in the first class of Head Start, to attending public schools, receiving private financed scholarships, law school, etc. But the experience of being a busboy at 13 left an indelible impression on me, because it was an experience in which my job was to be invisible, but to ensure that the diners in this restaurant could easily throw away what they didn't want to eat, and to, as discreetly and quietly as possible, to clear the table and to go around the room doing that all night long. And that experience has stuck with me, because that experience was about being invisible and being at the margin of the room and really existing without dignity or even an acknowledgement from many of those diners, a recognition that I possess humanity, that I'm a human being, by simply saying thank you or hello. And when I think about the work we do today at the Ford Foundation, so much of this work is about supporting the voices, dreams, and aspirations of people around the world who live at the margins and who simply want to live their lives with dignity, something that every human being is entitled to. And yet, billions live without.
You know, last night I came back from the Ola house, from the Onassis LA house, where I have an office, and I heard very late at night a BBC report about workers who are picking strawberries in Oxnard and who are essential workers, but who don't have any security because they don't even have legitimate papers to stay in this country. And it breaks your heart, and I think this pandemic has brought in a way to the forefront problems inherent in the system in which we're working, for lack of a better term, of extreme capitalism. And I'm wondering, has this new reality shifted your sense of where resources need to be channeled?
It hasn't shifted my view of where we need to channel our energies. I have felt for many years that inequality and the systems and structures which generate inequality need to be attacked. There are design systems reform that we have to think about. We have an economy that is delivering far too little prosperity. And it is designed to deliver the kind of inequality that we have because we have privileged capital over labor. We have made it impossible for certain people in the economy to make a decent wage because of the way we have designed, particularly for large multinational companies. We have designed the incentives. We've designed the business model. One of the things that has been incredibly harmful to the idea of social mobility in this country is the way in which our corporations over many years operated under the ideology of Milton Friedman's shareholder capitalism, that the role of the firm is to deliver profits, maximal profits to shareholders. That idea has actually been one of the most pernicious ideological frameworks that I've seen in my lifetime, because it has rendered secondary the health of your workers, the health of the communities where you do your business, the people in those communities, and it has made it virtually impossible for the CEOs who want to do the right thing and move towards a more stakeholder capitalism idea. It has made it very difficult for them because the people who monitor and scrutinize and judge performance, who are primarily analysts on Wall Street who cover companies, have very narrow definitions of success. And if you're off by a penny in your projections about profits, or you miss a target, you'll be heavily penalized. But it may actually be important to miss a target, a financial target, if you hit a social target.
Right.
And I think that conversation around corporate performance, I hope is now possible with the recent decision by the Business Roundtable to sign a compact around stakeholder capitalism. The belief that while shareholders matter, so do workers and customers and communities, that each of these has a stake in the company. And if we can actually realize that idea, it will be a huge, I think, force for addressing inequality, for addressing the way in which we have just created an unsustainable social stratification that will ultimately be fatal for our democracy.
You know, this brings me naturally to a question I've wanted to ask you. When we speak about criminal justice, we tend to think of individuals, but there's also the issue of crimes committed by corporations. What can an institution such as the Ford Foundation do to counteract, as it were, the chronic non-enforcement corporate crime?
Well, I think what the Ford Foundation can do is support organizations working to bring more justice in society, the civil society organizations who are demanding accountability for all kinds of problems that are created by powerful institutions and people. The question globally of corruption is a critical issue that needs to be addressed everywhere, including the United States. And the work of a foundation like Forward is not to be itself involved like an NGO or civil society organization, but it is to support those organizations as a donor committed to strengthening democracy. There is nothing more important in democracy than trust. Trust of institutions and leaders and systems and structures by the populace.
It's hard.
And if the populace, it's very hard because it's easy to be cynical. It's easy to be hopeless.
I don't
and
think
we
you
should
are.
be
I don't
worried.
think you are. You know, knowing
I'm
you,
not, but
you're
I'm not, Paul. But you know what? What do I have to be hopeless about? I have a level of security and privilege such that the last thing I should be is hopeless or self-pitying or any such thing. That's not to say that there aren't days sheltering in place is a little depressing, all alone in the apartment. There's no doubt.
Yeah,
but,
I know.
But the hard work that is being done by people on the front lines, people who are truly the courageous, valiant heroes of this era, are not the privileged and secure financially people like me. And what I worry about is the growing hopelessness in our society, because hope is the oxygen of democracy. And hopelessness and inequality asphyxiate democracy. And so I worry about my country. I worry that we aren't going to be willing to engage in the deep introspection. And when I say we, I mean we, powerful, privileged, secure people in this country who have an inordinate amount of power, which is never the way a democracy succeeds, when a very few have an inordinate amount of power and resources. So what is going to be demanded of us is that we who are in power have to listen with humility and respond to the needs of people who are fed up with our ideas about how the world should work for them without actually asking them, who have grown impatient with the idea of social mobility and getting a college degree will ensure financial security, et cetera, et cetera. While a small number of us have done incredibly well. And I count myself among that group.
And what interests me in your response here is you worry about the lack of hope, or the way in which hope seems to be tampered with now. And much like Baldwin, you worry about the future of the U.S. while loving this country so much.
Indeed, Baldwin is one of my heroes, and I have been inspired by Baldwin. I don't think I am as cynical about white people as Baldwin was. I mean, Baldwin said, white people are hopeless when it comes to understanding and empathizing with the plight of Black people in America. I don't believe that. I believe that with knowledge and empathy and compassion, that is going to be essential for all of us to get through this horrific period. We can have deeper understanding of each other's plight. We can understand how not only people of color, but rural white folk, working class white folk, we are all feeling marginalized during this time. Mm. And so I want to acknowledge that the pain and suffering that far too many of us is experiencing crosses the color line. And it's truly frightening, I think, especially to white Americans who, for the first time, according to very good research by two economists at Princeton, we have potentially, for the first time in this country's history, a generation of downwardly mobile white people. Mm. We have never had that in America. And the implications for our body politic and our social fabric is tremendous.
We often speak about the need to confront dark aspects of American history. And I know you, like myself, admire someone like Bryan Stevenson quite deeply. And we also feel that we need to confront the powerful institutions from within. As someone who runs one of these institutions, how do you grapple with these questions, which involve both the dark history of this country and the dark history sometimes of the corporations we run?
Well, I certainly understand in America how difficult it is for us to reconcile our narrative of opportunity, equality, justice with the reality from our origins of the gap between that beautiful, noble language and how many Americans live lives far removed from those aspirations. And in fact, people acted antithetically to those ideals. And so part of the challenge in this country is we are unable to reconcile those narratives because we've told ourselves that we are a exceptional country where exceptional things can happen to you if you work hard and play by the rules. When we know that you can work hard and play by the rules and still live in poverty. So my institution is one such privileged institution. We have to interrogate our own practices, policies, cultural norms, and reflect on.
And history.
How do we match our rhetoric and our reality? And it means we have to ask ourselves about our power and reflect on.
And history.
How do we match our rhetoric and our reality? And it means we have to ask ourselves about our power and the power imbalance with the organizations we give money to, who sometimes feel like supplicants. We have to address that in honest, candid ways by putting the issue of power on the table and actually listening and not privileging the credentialed knowledge of experts over the lived experience and authentic knowledge of people closest to the problems we are hoping to solve.
I recently had occasion to speak with Bill McKibben, who has put so much energy into campaigns for fossil fuel divestment. Are there changes you would like to see in the Ford Foundation stock portfolio?
Well, I think the Ford Foundation's endowment is something that we have had a great amount of discussion since I've been president. We have taken $1 billion of our $13 billion foundation endowment and are investing that in impact investments where we seek a double bottom line, financial and social return. We have examined our portfolio, and where we have found challenges, we have redressed those challenges. For example, the issue of prisons as one such example. So we are aggressively monitoring our fund managers and giving them clear direction on the kinds of investments that we would not look favorably upon. And I think we're making progress. It is a process.
You know, the Onassis Foundation doesn't speak of itself as a philanthropic foundation, but as a foundation for public benefit, which I find very interesting, the difference. And it, as you know, I'm a quotomaniac by profession. And this quotation by Albert Camus speaks to me profoundly, and I'd love you to react to it. He says, too many people have decided to do without generosity in order to practice charity.
Well, I believe in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King on this question of philanthropy and charity and generosity. He said the following: philanthropy is commendable, but it should not allow the philanthropist to overlook the economic injustice which makes philanthropy necessary. And he was drawing a distinction between charity and generosity and justice and dignity, and challenging philanthropists to self-reflect on how their businesses, their enterprise, their work to create wealth actually produced the injustice that they were now seeking to ameliorate through their philanthropy. And that if you actually are pursuing justice, you might reconsider how you practice your business to create less injustice and to allow your workers and others to share in the bounty of your profits so that there can be more equality and fairness and justice.
Darren, I had so many more questions for you, including one that I'd like to ask you when I see you in person and do not only give you a virtual hug, but a real one. For instance, what is Darren Walker reading at this moment? What artists is he particularly interested in? Because your interests are capacious and generous. I want to thank you so much for taking my call, and I can't wait to see you in person. But for the moment, thank you for speaking with me. Stay safe, stay well, and I hope that when I get back to New York, I have a moment with you. Thank you, Darren, so much.
Thank you, Paul. This has been a treat for me. It's always an enlightening experience and an invigorating experience to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Be well.
Bye-bye.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.